Welcome to another episode of Lethal Company Dissected. For today's episode, I wanted to take a closer look at fall damage. I first started playing during version 40, and it's changed a couple times since then, so part of me is torn on making this when another patch might just make this outdated again. However, the last couple patches leading up to this took away a couple exploits relating to it, so I imagine it's in a pretty good place now from the developer's perspective. I can't think of any major reasons it would need to be changed, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So how does it work? Falls above a certain height can cause either 30 damage, 50 damage, 80 damage, or it will just be outright lethal. And you'll always take any of these exact amounts of damage and never anything in between. This is calculated by the amount of time spent falling, where a counter runs and selects the amount of damage based on that. I'll throw the code up on the screen, as well as the calculated times for each threshold, datamined with courtesy from joshcantcode. Because it's based on the amount of time falling, this means that if I looped myself in a fall not that high above the ground, coming out of this would still be lethal because I was falling for way more than the required amount of time. The actual height doesn't matter. In rare instances, I think this could create some issues. I don't have any definitive proof of this, but it might be possible for someone experiencing lag to get screwed by this, if a connection hiccup causes you to get stuck in a fall for longer than you were supposed to. Without all of the exact context, we can't be 100% sure that's what's happening in this clip that was submitted to me, but I think this is probably pretty good evidence of a fall being worsened due to lag. And I'll talk more about why that is when I review specific locations later in the video. So bearing in mind there might be some slight inconsistencies on occasion, let's ignore that for now and move on to figuring out what these different damage breakpoints mean exactly. Just because it isn't directly based on a difference in height, and is using time spent falling instead, that doesn't mean we can't figure out what those corresponding heights normally are. And they happen to line up nicely with some pretty natural values. 30 damage happens when falling from above 15 vertical units, 50 damage happens above 20 units, 80 damage happens above 25 units, and lethal falls happen at around 30 units. Now, to come up with these numbers, I'm doing some pretty generous rounding for some of them. The actual numbers are closer to this, but as you can see, those aren't far off. So what we have is a system where everything under 15 units is safe, but from there, every additional 5 units causes and worsens the damage, until it kills you around 30. Or if you're not worried about all the breakpoints in between, another way of looking at it is that the minimum height that guarantees death is basically double the height of the lowest fall that causes damage. Now, if you're wondering what these units even are in practical terms, I'm of course talking about whole coordinates within the game engine. Like if I'm modifying my location in Cheat Engine, and I'm standing perfectly at coordinate 0, changing it to 30 is pretty close to the exact height that will kill me. If you're wondering what this means precisely in terms of feet or meters, I have no idea. To the best of my understanding, it's kind of an arbitrary thing in the Unity engine, and it's not mapped to any kind of real-world measurement. But it's pretty clear that a single unit is bigger than a foot, but smaller than a meter. In Experimentation, if we compare the platform at the top of this ladder to the top of the wall next to it, that's pretty much exactly 1 unit. So you can get a feel for how big that is compared to the player. Not that any of this will help you judge distances precisely just by eyeballing them. I think that's pretty much impossible, but hopefully it gives you a better ballpark understanding. These damage breakpoints are fixed and aren't modified by anything else. For example, a near-lethal fall that removes 80 HP will do the same regardless if I'm carrying 0 weight or if I'm incredibly heavy. But there is one exception, as the lowest damage tier of 30 damage will be reduced if you don't have enough to survive that, so long as you aren't currently critical. Critical damage occurs when you drop below 20 HP. When this happens, your health will refill at a rate of 1 HP per second until it fills back up to 20. Once it reaches 20, it stops refilling any further, but at 20, you're no longer considered critical. What this means is that what normally causes 30 damage won't actually kill you when your HP is only 20, because it's floored to drop your HP to 5 instead, causing only 15 damage in that situation. Think of it as a minor safety net. However, the way this is coded is that it only does this flooring for fall damage amounts that are beneath 50. So it only applies to that first tier fall damage, or in other words, falls up to 20 units. Any falls higher than 20 units won't be granted the same protection. I should also add that floodwaters and quicksand don't do anything to cushion falls. I think it's a little unfortunate, because you usually want to do everything you can to avoid them. If there was a niche incentive to sometimes land in them on purpose, that could make for a pretty neat risk-reward trade-off. Okay, so let's take a look at some landmarks across the different moons to help give a sense of what you can get away with. On Experimentation, the top of this ladder is 8.5 units above the ground below, and the top of this ledge is 9.5 units. You're not anywhere near 15 units, so it's perfectly safe to jump down from here. But if you're versed at doing this because you recall taking damage here in the past, that's happened to me too, but you haven't had to worry about that for a while now. It hasn't worked that way since before version 45, and I'll link to a video by Thalonius that talks about when that was changed. Between the base of the area outside the fire escape and the top of the railing is roughly 23 units, and will cause 50 damage. So jumping off of here won't kill you if you're at full health, but if you took some damage previously and don't know what your health is, which is pretty much a given as we don't have a precise display for that, then rushing your way down here wouldn't be wise. However, if for some reason you're really in a rush, we could jump to this pipe, and walking off carefully from the lowest point to the ground below the fire escape is only 30 damage. And because we can always survive this kind of fall as long as we're not currently critical, it doesn't matter how much damage we took previously. This will always be survivable. Not that any of this matters if you only care about actual strategies you might want to use. There's safer ways down to avoid damage entirely, but it's just some food for thought regarding the fall damage mechanics. In fact, if we slide off the edge of the pipe just a little bit further down over here, we don't even have to aim for any of the railings. The ground below is a little less than 15 units away, so this is completely safe regardless. Lastly, if you want another visual representation of the highest you can fall without taking damage, the water tower in Experimentation is good for that as well. The top of this railing, compared to the floor below, is barely under 15 units, so you won't take any damage walking off from there. But it is close enough that jumping will cause 30 damage, so this is right at the cutoff for what causes damage and what doesn't. Let's move on to Assurance. The main entrance is only 8.5 units above the base of the ladder, so that's nowhere near causing damage, and there's nothing really of interest over here. This tall ladder, however, makes for a great example for the cutoff of a guaranteed lethal fall. The very top of the ladder is roughly 32 units above the ground below, so dropping from there will be lethal. However, sliding off the edge of the cliff will make the fall less than 30 units, so you'll survive as long as you can take the 80 damage penalty. So yeah, sometimes you can fall pretty damn far and get away with it. As far as dismounting from the pipe in Assurance goes, I don't think anyone is really concerned about this, because there are plenty of places to get down without taking damage. However, even if you go out of your way to try and take as much damage here as possible, I don't think there's anywhere where you can take more than 30 damage. So if you're playing really sloppy and somehow get hurt falling off of the pipe, it'll always be survivable as long as you weren't critical. But the same is not true for getting onto the pipe in the first place. If you mess up the jump, that can cause 50 damage, and there's no safety net for that. I don't know if it's the small bump here that would sometimes trip me up, but I found that running along this angle instead helps avoid any awkwardness with that and makes the jump easier. Or maybe it's just in my head. On to Vow. Not all of the ground beneath the collapsing bridge is perfectly even, and it's possible to get caught on some ledges that'll break the fall up for you. But most parts of the bridge will result in 50 damage if you fall below, so it's perfectly survivable if you have full health, but it can kill you if you don't. On offense, if you mess up the jump to get to the fire escape early, this should cause 50 damage as well, but you're not going to die trying, unless you just entirely go over the railing by accident way too soon. This is what a successful attempt looks like, by the way, if you weren't already aware you could do this. Although not bothering and just using an extension ladder instead is probably smarter. Now, once you're on the pipe, there's a few places that can cause 30 damage when walking off, but you can avoid this by finding higher ground below and aiming for that instead. Now, let's take another look at this clip from earlier. The reason this doesn't seem possible under normal circumstances is that landing on this railing should have only caused 30 damage. Even if the player was critical at some point earlier, which the person who sent me the clip is pretty sure they weren't, there's no way they were still critical after running along the pipe. They're moving pretty slow, and it's a fairly long walk here from the fire escape, so their HP would have refilled out of critical even if they were attacked immediately before leaving the building. This really shouldn't have been lethal. This player was also reportedly having some connection issues, having to do stuff like quit and rejoin to get their voice working. So even though it's not concrete proof, I do think this is likely evidence of lag worsening a player's fall. If you have any clips of players dying from falls where it seems like they shouldn't have, send them my way because I'd like to see if there's more of this. Now I'm going to skip over March, Rend, and Dine, because none of these levels have noteworthy verticality outdoors, so we're moving on to Titan. The drop from the top ledge down to the wider part of the staircase is around 31 units, so that will be lethal. However, dropping down from the top light is very close to 25 units. It usually causes 50 damage, but jumping will cause 80. And the bottom light is only roughly 11 units above that platform, so from that one you won't take any damage at all. A popular spot to drop items from here is over this railing, and the ground below is very close to 20 units away. So jumping can cause 50 damage, while just walking off will only cause 30. But of course, that can all be avoided by just going a little bit further down the stairs first, where both the stairs bring you lower, and the ground in front of them is higher, so you don't actually have to go that far down the stairs to avoid fall damage entirely. If you're wondering about the other staircase, walking off of the top railing from this spot is a 50 damage fall. And actually, even from the very top, That's survivable too, causing 80 damage. So as long as you're in good health, these are a few more options for getting down quickly while avoiding the stairs. If you're wondering about indoor pitfalls, all of these appear to be using Killboxes. That's because none of these obey the rules of regular fall damage. Not only would all of them be survivable with full health, but there's a couple spots that aren't 15 units and wouldn't even cause damage. Now, having talked about fall damage in other games before, I know some people get a little annoyed to learn about these sorts of inconsistencies. For example, in Dark Souls, if it weren't for a Killbox, you'd actually be able to survive falling off of the Gargoyle's rooftop. However, this is all totally fine. It's a question of whether or not any Killboxes are egregious because they look like they should be survivable, and I generally don't think that's the case here. For a game that's out to kill you as frequently as Lethal Company, I don't think anyone will question dying when falling into a black void. If you really wanted to nitpick, there might be some subtle friction here in that smaller drops did previously cause damage, so it's possible that some of the shallower pits in here were designed with earlier fall damage mechanics in mind, where the difference between taking damage at all and instant death would have been less obvious. Now that we know we can fall considerably far without dying, in an extremely niche situation, I could sort of understand someone looking at this and thinking it shouldn't kill them, because even the lowest part of this pit would be survivable if this was outdoors. So maybe there's a few viewers looking at this and thinking it's not fair, but let's be real, it's totally fine. Most players are going to die a lot to interior pitfalls before they start testing the limits of how far they can fall outside, so they'll know what to expect very quickly.
Oh!
I just fell to my fucking...
Okay.
We both just jumped in those holes.
If you're curious which pit is shallow enough that it wouldn't cause damage at all without a killbox, we find that in the long room with this pit here. This drop is roughly 13 units. Even if we were to go up the stairs and then up onto this, you'd probably expect that to put us high enough to at least take damage, but actually this is the only pit to not have a flat bottom. It actually ramps up to here, so this is still under 15 units. Obviously, I'm only surviving these demonstrations because I'm using Cheat Engine. Lastly, I know some people are going to ask about the jetpack, but I think this is a file away for later situation because I think it's bugged. Sometimes when I fly straight up, I take damage even without any obstacles around, but sometimes I don't. And I'm not talking about overheating and exploding, mind you. Sometimes when trying to simply take off, I take damage. Sometimes I don't. Taking damage when trying to take off seems to result from flying and falling and taking damage with a jetpack previously, like it was somehow storing extra damage and decided to apply it afterwards. I wondered if any mods or cheat engine were the cause, but I've loaded the vanilla game without anything like that running, and I still found that to be the case. Because of the overall weirdness to it, I won't be surprised if we see some major changes in a future patch, so I'm not as worried about trying to figure out every little detail at the moment. However, we do know that it attempts to remove or negate fall damage, and I can speak more broadly about the current implications of that. While you'll still take damage after falling with a jetpack, if you have full health, it should never be fatal. It seems to never remove more than 30 HP, so I believe it should always be survivable as long as you're not critical. And when I say using a jetpack, I don't mean that you even have to be using it currently to try and soften your landing. You only had to have used it once, even for just a split second in your current session midair. Or if you did have to use it recently, it's incredibly generous. So for example, wearing the jetpack and jumping off of this ledge without using it results in dying, as we would expect. However, if I fly up off of this ledge to get much higher in the air, and then let go completely, I'll fall from much higher and survive, despite making no effort to actually soften my landing. I actually like this, and even if there's some stuff to fix with the jetpack, I kind of hope this particular aspect stays this way. For now at least, just tap using the jetpack to help survive falls, but don't worry too much about feathering your inputs or trying to actually slow your descent. Though if your health is low afterwards, don't use the jetpack a second time because of the stored damage glitch or whatever that is. It usually removes over 40 health, so you gotta worry about it. If you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching. I'd like to give another shout out to joshcantcode for digging up some of the code and offering further insight. And also Thalonius. Every time an update comes out, they seem interested in keeping up with the changes to fall damage. Should further changes happen, I'll mention them in a sticky comment here, but honestly I wouldn't be surprised if Thalonius beat me to it. While my research was my own, they deserve all the credit for being the first person really involved in these discussions here and trying to help the community understand how it's been changing. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider doing all the usual stuff that helps on YouTube. Or you can also support me directly on Patreon. That's patreon.com/illusorywall. An extra special thanks to all of my backers at the Evil Vagrant tier. Basileus, Europa, Gary Marshall, Inseoratable, Jack Gerhardt, Kakaruma, Carl Germ, Kiko Abad, Chris, Lazy Tangent, Matt, Nashwan Azari, Nate Hines, Ronax, The Majalis Duo, and Zelther. Thanks again, and have a great day.